Hello and welcome. My name is Gabriel, and today I am going to be recommending some books that I think you should read if you think that you hate reading. Okay, so maybe hate is like a strong word, but these are books that I think you should read if you don't read. And also, if you used to read all the time and now you feel really burnt out and illiterate, I feel you. I understand you. I love you. I have feelings for you, because I was you. So, for many years of my life, I was not in this habit that I am now of just reading one book after another. And so when I would read, it would only be for a book that I was super excited about. And so those are the kinds of books that I want to recommend to you. When I read most of these, I was not this voracious reader, and they just caught my interest. And then there are some that I have read over this last year that I think are just really exciting and accessible, and that might have a broader appeal. First up on my list is one that you have probably already heard of. It is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. You might know this because it was part of Reese Witherspoon's book club, and then it was later adapted into a Hulu TV show starring Reese Witherspoon. This book is about the Richardson family, an upper middle class white family living in Shaker Heights, Ohio, who are the owners of a duplex which they rent out to various tenants. And during the year that this book is set, they rent it out to the Warrens, a mother and daughter, and it follows these two families over the course of a year leading up to a fire which destroys the Richardsons' house. I'm recommending it here because I think that this book really toes the line between young adult and literary fiction. And I think that it is a fantastic book for somebody getting back into reading. Because I think a big part of the reading slump that a lot of people hit when they are in their mid to late teens is that they've probably grown out of YA, or they've grown out of the tropes that you see in young adult novels. But it's difficult to find literary fiction with the same immediacy and accessibility. And this book offers that. It is very exciting and fast-paced, but there's also something more there. There's something really engaging and exciting in terms of the writing. I think that this book is riveting and lively, with really memorable characters, but if you pay attention to things like the tone and the structure, you'll notice a lot of cool things, and you might realize what a unique medium books are for storytelling. And you might want to read a few more when this one is done. Up next, I want to recommend Cersei and the Song of Achilles, both by Madeline Miller. These are two Greek mythology retellings. They are perfect for if you were a Percy Jackson kid, but they are still perfectly accessible if you have absolutely no knowledge of Greek mythology. Cersei is her most recent novel, and it is also my favorite. It follows Cersei, the goddess known from the Odyssey for turning men into pigs. She is also credited as the first witch in Western literature. This book tells her life story, connecting the dots between various myths and filling in the gaps to create a complete picture of this woman's life. This was one of my absolute favorite books that I read last year, and it is one that I recommend to literally everybody that I come across. Because Madeline Miller transforms these ancient myths into something that feels so relevant and present and urgent. But she also has this really beautiful and sometimes poetic style, which isn't hard to follow at all. It's just little flourishes that she adds, which transform this from a good, exciting book into a great one. And then her first book, The Song of Achilles, is also incredible. This book is a retelling of the Trojan War as seen in Homer's Iliad from the perspective of Patroclus, the close companion of Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors. This book imagines their love story, following them as childhood friends, all the way up through the final days of the war. It is epic and passionate and absolutely devastating. If you read and love Madeline Miller's books and you're left wanting more, I actually recommend going back and checking out some of those original Greek myths. There are some incredible new and exciting translations for you to check out, which are very accessible. My favorite of which is Emily Wilson's Odyssey, which I have mentioned quite a few times, as well as Anne Carson's translation of the Oresteia, which tells the story of King Agamemnon's return home after the Trojan War, as well as the fallout of his murder at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra. Up next, I want to recommend The Beljar by Sylvia Plath. This is the first classic on this list, although it's more of a modern classic. But don't let that title intimidate you. This book is full of really biting humor, and it has a narrative voice which feels really shockingly present and relevant. This book is about Esther Greenwood, a young woman who, after a maddening summer internship in New York City, returns home and finds herself spiraling into a bleak, depressive mental state. It is an unbelievably raw and honest depiction of mental illness, and while it isn't afraid to explore the darkest parts of the human mind, it is ultimately a story about hope. I read this for the first time when I was 16, and I was immediately drawn in by Esther's bluntness. She is rude and funny and clever, and no matter how erratic or severe her behavior gets, she makes so much sense. Give this one a try, and if you are hooked, I recommend you check out even more of Sylvia Plath's writing, especially her poetry. Ariel is the collection that she is best known for, but my favorite is The Colossus. Up next, I want to recommend The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I read this one over the summer, and I never really got a chance to talk about it here. This book follows Xiomara, a 16-year-old Dominican girl growing up in New York City, who finds poetry as an outlet for expressing herself, venting her frustrations growing up in an oppressive religious household. This book is actually written in verse, and the poems that you are reading are meant to mimic the poems that Xiomara is writing. And it is a really beautiful and unique way to experience this story. The poems are fast-paced and clever, and every word is so intentional, and it just packs this magnificent punch. It's also a very quick read. This book is marketed as young adult, so it is great for younger readers, but the themes are universal and the writing is so stunning that I think that it can and should be appreciated by readers of all ages. Next, I want to talk about The Deep by River Solomon. This is really high concept, and it is one of the coolest premises I have ever seen in a book. So, The Deep is about a society of mermaids who have evolved from pregnant women who were thrown overboard from slave ships. The story focuses on Yetu, a young girl who has been given the responsibility of holding the memories for the entire society because they feel that their people's history is too painful for everybody to be aware of at once. You see her grapple with this responsibility as well as her journey to discovering the world above the surface. I've included this book because it is such a cool and unique premise. I think it's impossible to hear what it's about and not wonder what goes on in here. But there is also a really fascinating meta-narrative which follows how this book came to be. So the story in this book is not the first iteration of this mermaid mythos. And the concept was actually created by the techno group Drexcia, and their idea was expanded upon by the experimental industrial rap group Clipping in their EP, The Deep, and that EP then inspired River Solomon to write this book. The vocalist for Clipping is actually Daveed Diggs, who you might know from Hamilton, and their music is incredible, so I suggest that you go check them out. And actually, all of the members of Clipping are credited as co-writers for The Deep. There is Daveed Diggs, William Hudson, and Jonathan Snipes. So, this book is incredible, the music is too, and it is just an amazing world to immerse yourself into. After that, I want to talk about Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty. The first non-fiction on this list, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Stories from the Crematory, is a memoir about Caitlin Doughty's time working as a crematory operator. She talks about how working in the death industry made her realize some really deeply rooted problems with how our society processes death. By turning death and funerals into a privatized business, we have completely cut ourselves off from the reality of death and from our dead loved ones, and thus we are missing valuable steps in the grieving process and are unable to visualize our own end, which makes all of us so completely afraid and unable to talk about the reality of death. This book is frank and funny, and it shows all of us how we can better appreciate our lives by understanding how they end. Next, I want to recommend another memoir, which is also the first graphic novel on this list. Here I have Fun Home, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. This book is a memoir about Alison Bechdel, a lesbian cartoonist, and it follows her relationship with her father, who was a closeted gay man and a funeral director who killed himself her freshman year of college. I'm just now realizing that I have 2 books about funeral homes on this list, and if I'm making this one sound like a downer, it's because it kind of is. But it is also full of humor and charm, and it is just stunning. Bechdel has this dry, really morbid sense of humor, and a really intricate art style, which brings her memories to life in really intimate detail. You might have heard of this book if you are familiar with the 2016 Tony Award-winning musical Fun Home, with music by Janine Tesori. And after you read this, if you're interested, I recommend that you check that show out because the score is so beautiful. This book is packed with family drama, identity struggles, artistic struggles, and it is phenomenal, especially if you don't think that you have the attention span to sit down and read an entire novel. Here, you can flip through her really beautiful drawings and also get a great story out of it. We're nearing the end. Second to last I have And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is one of the most popular murder mysteries ever from one of the most widely published and celebrated authors of all time, Agatha Christie. This is also the only murder mystery I have ever read. And I have trouble, getting excited about new ones because I have convinced myself I've already read the best one. So, And Then There Were None tells the story about 10 strangers who are invited to an island for some unknown event, and once they get there, they start getting murdered one by one. This is one of the most terrifying and suspenseful and satisfying books I have ever read. It's absolutely bonkers. Agatha Christie is a genius. And that's my full recommendation for this one, but I also want to add just kind of a funny anecdote. So, when I first read this, it was around the time that the BBC was airing their new miniseries adaptation, which is excellent, by the way. But I really wanted to watch it, so I created a group chat with a bunch of people I was, kind of friends with, and invited them to come to a party where we were all going to watch the show. And because of that group chat, I have spoken to most of those people, every day for the last 5 years. That kind of doesn't have anything to do with the book, but if you want to take something from it, I'll say that this is a book that brings people together. And then finally on the list, we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. One of my all-time favorites by one of my all-time favorites, Oscar Wilde. The Picture of Dorian Gray is about a young, beautiful man named Dorian Gray, who has caught the attention of a great artist, Basil Hallward. Dorian becomes his muse, and Basil paints a portrait of Dorian, which captures his essence and his beauty perfectly. And when Dorian sees this painting of himself, he becomes obsessed with his own youth and beauty, and he is devastated by the fact that he will continue to grow old and ugly while this painting can stay young and beautiful forever. And I won't say anything beyond that point because this book is full of weird twists and turns, and it is so much more fun if you discover them on your own. And I think that this book can be appealing to everyone because the themes and the emotions are so powerful and the drama is so intense. It can be a really indulgent and satisfying experience to just dig into this world. Oscar Wilde's writing style can be so lush and rich, but also incredibly funny and clever. And Oscar Wilde is just a fascinating person to learn about outside of the context of his writing, just because of his own personal philosophies. He was the kind of person who would say something, not necessarily because he thought it was true, but because he thought it sounded clever, or because he thought he had found a way to phrase it which was beautiful. And that leads to a very unique reading experience. And then, if you read this and you like this book, I recommend you check out his plays, which are very funny. My favorite is The Importance of Being Earnest. And he has also got some lovely poetry. And that is it for this list. These are books that I think you will love if you don't read very often. They are all exciting and accessible, but they also show what is so unique and powerful about books as a medium for experiencing new stories. But if your goal is to become a more constant and consistent reader, I'll say that reading often is a skill which needs to be practiced. And the way that I created this habit for myself was by reading a bunch of long, boring books and just pushing through them to build up this tolerance and this patience. So, if you are interested in becoming a reader the hard way, like I did, then I will suggest that you read the book that got me back into reading, which was War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I've mentioned this book and my journey with it quite a few times, so I won't get into it, but basically I read this last March, and while I loved it, I left it feeling like I needed to read it again. And that is why this year, this March, my friend Kelsey and I, over at the channel I Read Today, are going to be running a read-along. I will link the announcement video and schedule for that down below if you want to join us. And aside from that, I have nothing else to say. If you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up and comment down below your thoughts on any of these books I mentioned today, and leave recommendations of your own favorite books. That's it for today, but I will see you guys next time.